Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Betting Pros podcast. I am Ryan Wormeli, joined today by Jason Lisk and by PJ Glasser. Jason, you and I were just talking a little March Madness last night, reacting live Selection Sunday, and I figured let's do it again here. But for the Betting Pros side, everybody who wants to hear our reactions should go check that out on the Fantasy Pros feed. Today, we are talking betting. Jason, of course, joining us from Pool Genius. Jason, I mean, like I said, we kind of had that instant, immediate stuff reaction last night. Now we've had a day to digest. How are you feeling?
I would like to change all my answers.
Yeah,
No, I'm
sure.
joking. No, after sleeping on it, no, I feel good. It was good to, then be able to jump in and look at the lines. I was so busy with the brackets, I missed some of the early line movement on a couple of the ones I liked, but I think they're still good. And we'll talk about them.
We'll definitely jump into all those. PJ, of course, joining us from BetQL. PJ, you and I have done plenty of TikToks together on the Betting Pro side. Obviously, we go back a long way. But this is one of the first times we've done actual March Madness content on one of these shows together. Typically, we focus on the football. So I'm happy to be talking a little college hoops with you.
Always, Warren. We got the best 2 days of the year coming up, best sporting event with the NCAA tournament. So I'm excited to break it down with you and Jason. It feels like every year, people kind of say that, oh, there's not a clear-cut winner, and there are a lot of different teams that can win it. And for the first time in a while, it feels like everybody's kind of picking the same team. So I think it's going to make for an interesting tournament.
Yeah, we'll definitely, have some fun running through that, and we'll try and highlight teams for everybody, both that might be undervalued and that might be overvalued, and kind of see where we line up and everything. As I said before, just want to re-mention for everybody, Jason and I did go live on the Fantasy Pros feed last night. You can find that on YouTube or on the Betting Pros, on the Fantasy Pros feed, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Today, like I said, we're hitting the betting angles with our two experts here. PG, I want to start with you on some of these day after bracket reactions. I kind of mentioned it with Jason, but you've had a night to sleep on it now. We had the big bracket reveal. There's so much information that comes out that first night. Everybody, which is the region of death, and who's going to come out where. What's everybody's first, just immediately gut reaction? Final four. Now that you've slept on it, you've done your own show. We've had some time to research. What were your sort of day after initial takeaways here from the bracket reveal?
I think there were there were two big ones, Worm. I'd say the first one is that East Regional. I can't remember a time where we had that many conference champions in the top 4 or 5 seeds and how loaded it is, right? Obviously, UConn won the Big East. They're the defending champs, but giving them the Big 12 conference tournament champs in Iowa State, the Big 10 tournament champs in Illinois, and then Auburn out of the SEC. You have, according to KenPom, 3 of the top 5 teams overall in KenPom are all in the East Regional. 4 of the top 11 teams on offense are in the East. 4 of the top 11 defenses are in the East. So it's absolutely loaded. It feels like a lot of these teams, right? If you put Iowa State, Illinois, Auburn, and some of these other regions, they'd be extremely popular. But because they're in UConn's region, people are kind of overlooking them. So just how loaded that East Regional was really stuck out to me. And then the other one would probably be, we had 32 conference tournaments, and of those 32, 19 one seeds lost, right? There were a ton of bid stealers. And because of that, we have a lot of 11, 12, 13 seeds this year that other years, if you look and you compare it in the past, these teams like a Duquesne in the 11, right? Or a 12 seed that we have with UAB, like these teams are rated low opposed to other years, some of these 11 seeds, 10 seeds. So I think the conference tournament week and the fact that we had so many bid stealers as well, it makes it very interesting as well.
Jason, what was your reaction to seeing some of those teams on that kind of 10, 11 seed line range?
Obviously, the way the weekend shook out, it wasn't completely unexpected after we had all that happened basically altered the dynamics of the bracket. Typically, our cut line is at like the last 11 seed. Sometimes a 12 seed is a play in. We saw that with I'm trying to think. Oregon was a 12 a few years ago. There was like a case. Well, I guess Georgetown and Oregon State won the titles. What was it, 2 or 3 years ago? And were put on the 12 line. We're getting 10s and 11s out of those teams right now. Now, I do think there's a mix of like really good type of 12s, sometimes would have been 13s in the past, but there's definitely creep in the bottom half. The 13s, 14s, 15s, 16s are probably on average much lower power rated than a typical year, which has
J-
created some bigger spreads in some of these games.
Jason, we talked last night about that draw for UConn and how the committee did them no favors. Again, after having a night to sleep on it, we're still thinking that was kind of the tough draw as far as the top seeds go, right?
It is the tough draw after the first weekend. I think the first weekend, although Florida Atlantic's there, Florida Atlantic has not been in good form, certainly for a while. Will they recapture it? Who knows? But they certainly haven't looked. Last year, they were on my short list of teams to watch coming in. They were peaking entering the NCAA tournament when they played Memphis. You certainly didn't foresee the Final Four running coming from the 9 seed, but they were on the rise. That is not the case this year. Northwestern has actually played better than you would expect based on the injuries they've had, but they are injury impacted. That's probably the weakest 8-9. So they do catch a break, I think, early. I would be stunned if they lose to one of those teams, honestly. But then after that, it gets tough. It gets tough for them. Now they're the best. They're the best team. They're the best team, and they're the favorite for a reason. Because when they have all their pieces together, they have been dominant in a way that the others maybe haven't quite been against the top teams on their schedule.
PJ, is there a top seed that you feel like got the most favorable draw if UConn is kind of on the opposite end of that?
I think UNC got a really good draw. I think, I agree with Jason. I think the 8-9 matchup for UConn, FAU, or Northwestern is very favorable. I think for UNC, if they can get past the 8-9 game with Mississippi State and Michigan State, I really like how their region sets up for them. Alabama's a 4 seed that I think every top seed wanted in their region. They're really playing bad at the wrong time. St. Mary's is a team that is in the tournament year after year, but really can never make a deep run. Arizona, it just feels like is a team that people really don't trust. Baylor's a 3 seed. I don't see going all that far. So I thought of all the 1 seeds, UNC's path certainly looks like the most favorable.
Jason, you don't know this, but PJ did go to Alabama. So if he's talking down on them, you know
Okay.
that he really means it and surely believes that.
Yeah, so he's fully aware of the defensive issues they've had over the
Oh
last
yeah.
month.
Yes,
So, yeah, I
definitely.
mean, yeah. In fact, on that point, and I feel bad. Like when I bracketed it out, I actually moved BYU to the 16, the Final Four seed, and had Alabama drop into the 5 line. The committee disagreed with me by 1 slot, and then because they did so, they bumped BYU to the 6 because of the Sunday rule, which they could have made this a better bracket, I think, by just having BYU 4, Alabama 5. This Alabama team is a traditional 5 that struggles. They are entering the tournament not peaking, playing bad defense. I do agree with that part. I think that Michigan State, Mississippi State game is tough, and I think the betting markets generally agree because North Carolina's advanced to Sweet 16 numbers are low, and then they pick up. And so I think what you're dealing with is a high variance situation with North Carolina. They have a very tough 8-9 matchup compared to a typical 1 seed.
Jason, I sort of threw this at you, in the heat of the moment last night. I wonder, again, now that you've had more time to look at the bracket, is there a matchup after the first round, a potential matchup that you'd like to see?
Oh, there are all sorts of numbers. I mean, it depends on how deep we want to go. Do we want to go UConn to Auburn?
Whatever round would excite you.
Yeah, I mean, look. I get excited by all these games. I'm twisted. UConn Auburn would be a fantastic. That's we've had this come up occasionally, and sometimes the 4s have won, sometimes the 1s have won. I'm thinking back to when Michigan beat Kansas and went to the championship game as a 4. It was that they were that type of like team. UConn last year didn't even have to play Kansas, but then we saw I think a year where Louisville was a 4 but rated in the top 4 on KenPom and lost. I'm trying to think if it was Kentucky or I think it might have been. Wait, no, actually they were the 4. Wichita State was the 1. Kentucky was the 8. Louisville was rated in the top 5, and people were like, "Oh, this is Louisville's bracket," and then Kentucky beat them as the 8 seed and went all the way to the championship game. So we've had these tough 4s, these tough regions, and I think this is one of those where you're like, "Man, that is a potential Final Four matchup in the Sweet 16," and whoever wins that game, if they both play, will probably be the betting market favorite to win from the Elite 8 on against against everybody else once they're past that point. I think that's how the markets would shape up if we looked ahead in the future.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting to think you sort of frame it as like a potential Final Four matchup. It's very easy, especially like as a casual fan, to get anchored to the seed line that they're in this tournament. But a 1 seed versus a 4 seed, it might sound like kind of, somewhat radically different. It's still 2 like top 15 teams. I mean, maybe even higher depending on how you're personally rating them. So it's still a very, very strong matchup where, everybody will be picking UConn, but you can certainly see that being a very close, exciting, really, really fun matchup. PJ, what about you? Any matchup, theoretically down the line, whether it's second round, Sweet 16, Elite Eight, anything that you would be really excited to see?
That UConn and Auburn game was the first one that jumped out to me as well. I think UNC and Arizona would be awesome just because it's the Caleb Love game, right?
Yeah.
And getting
Yeah.
to watch him against his former team with the trip to the Final Four, like that would be pretty cool. I think Tennessee and Purdue, another 1 and 2 matchup would be awesome just because of the coaches. You're talking about two excellent regular season coaches with Rick Barnes and Matt Painter. Those guys have the regular season figured out. They always have good teams. Barnes has only been to the Final Four once. Painter has never been. So if we can get a regional final with both of those coaches and somebody has to go to the Final Four, I think that would be really cool. So I'm with Jason. UConn Auburn would be at the top of the list. The fact that we would get a Final Four caliber game in the Sweet 16 would be really good. But I think that UNC, Arizona, and Tennessee Purdue matchup would have a ton of storylines as well.
We could see Rick Barnes going up against Texas in the second round too. Just
It's
him
true.
giving
Good.
a
Yeah.
lot of fun matchups for Tennessee in that region. And then PJ, I want to ask you because Jason and I talked about this last night already, but and really it's where most people usually start. Were there any like particular snubs that you feel pretty strongly about, or seeding issues that you were pretty taken aback by when you saw the reveal?
St. John's, I was surprised not only were they not in the field, but they weren't even one of the last four in. You know what I mean? I thought it was going to be a lot like when Alabama made it in the college football playoff, and like we're all human, and it's like Saban in Alabama. And I thought it was going to be the same kind of effect with Patino and St. John's, and the way that they looked against UConn. I don't know how you can watch that game and say like Virginia is a better team than St. John's was, right? Or some of these other teams. So I thought that was interesting. And then the seedings for some of these games. I mean, to have Gonzaga as a 5 seed, I thought was interesting. Florida as a 7. I thought they should have been a little higher. Michigan State and FAU. I mean, put those two teams in the 8, 9. I thought some of these seedings were a little bit off and didn't make much sense. But St. John's was the shocker to me. The fact that they weren't even in the last four in, I thought was
Well,
surprising.
I don't know if you saw my comments. I was like, I was disappointed because St. John's is probably a top 25 team just on raw rating. But if you look
Right.
at what they've done lately, we prepare our power ratings going in. We had St. John's in the top 15. If they would have been on the 11 line, we very well may have been picking them to like the Elite Eight, depending on their draw. This team was on a roll and they gave UConn all they could. They gave UConn as good a game as anybody. I don't know how the committee can ever say they used the eye test and put Virginia in. If they had watched Virginia, they would have burned the tape. I'm sorry to say that team can't. That team is just an awful watch. So I know they didn't do that. I was surprised. You don't need the narratives with Patino to even put them in. You could have justified putting that team in just based on everything they did down the stretch.
Yeah, yeah, PJ,
Crazy.
we kind of alluded to this, like you mentioned it with Matt Painter and Rick Barnes, and now we're kind of talking about it with Patino. I asked this of Jason last night also, but how do you sort of weigh the balance between this team is this level of quality this season based on the metrics and eye test, whatever else you're rating it on, versus what you know about these coaches and Tom Izzo in March, and on the other end, Matt Painter and Rick Barnes in March. How much are you weighing quality of team as you determine it versus what we've seen this coach do?
Well, I think coaching it weighs a ton, Worm, especially the day that we're the day of age that we're in with college basketball and NIL, and so much is changing, and kind of the one constant is coaching, right? And obviously, if you're in the tournament long enough, you suffer your fair share of upsets. Izzo has lost to a 15 seed, Middle Tennessee State. He's obviously been to a ton of Final Fours. But I think that's what a lot of people are gonna have issues with is these teams that are backed by great coaches that maybe haven't watched a ton of college basketball. Like Kansas, isn't good, right? But a lot of people are going to like Kansas because they're Kansas and they have Bill Self. Michigan State isn't very good, but it's Tom Izzo. So a lot of people are going to like them. So you have the coaches. You also have the teams. Like a lot of people are going to like FAU, San Diego State, because these teams made deep runs and they have some returning players, but these teams just do not profile anywhere near what they were last season. So to answer your question, I know that was a long-winded way of answering it, but I certainly think coaching, it does weigh a lot for sure in some extent, but you also have to look at these teams as well. Because at the end of the day, Izzo and these other guys, they're not shooting the ball. They're not playing defense, right? They can put you in certain spots. So I think it matters to a certain extent, but a lot of these teams with those coaches that we like to back, I'm down on a bunch of those teams this year.
Jason, I'm pretty sure last night you specifically also referenced
I
the
did.
Tom
I
Izzo
did.
losing as a 2 seed to a 15
I could
however
have
many
I could
years
have
ago.
talked about Coach K if he was still around. I mean, he's won so many titles, and then they'd have games like against Lehigh and
Right.
various other games
Mercer.
getting
Yeah.
run by South Carolina in the second round where they couldn't get a stop. Once I think in the last decade, and so it happens. It again. I agree with some of the larger points. What does this particular team profile as? If that coach has built a style, some styles work better in the tournament. And if that coach has built a style that works, I think that's a reason to back them if they've built kind of like if they've got like the formula. But if the team's drastically different than what they've typically had, like the Michigan State year they lost, they weren't as good on defense. They were better on offense. Um, some of these things happen. I mean, so yeah, I would look at. I don't rule anybody out on coaching. I'm probably more forgiving because maybe I can get value if the market is doing it more than I am.
Well, and they don't know how to win until they do. Tony
That's right.
Bennett, Jay Wright, Scott
Dean
Drew, like
Smith,
can't
Dean
win in
Smith,
March,
once upon a
and then they do.
time.
Yeah.
Dean Smith couldn't win the big one forever if we go back far enough. Lute Olson couldn't win until they went on a run and won as a 4 seed. So there's all sorts of coaches. Jim Boeheim was one you mentioned. You know, I mean, Jay Wright. How many bad years did they have before they won 2 out of 3? They got popped like 4 out of 5 years right before that. Like they were a 2 or 1 seed that lost in the second round. So it happens. And I think you get value sometimes by going against those narratives.
Yeah, I think there was a stretch where Jay Wright either was out in the first weekend or made it to the Final Four. It was never making it to the second weekend and getting out there because he was very hit or miss. But that just, one of the great coaches, of the last decade. So it just goes to show you that can happen to anybody. I want to take a quick second to mention our bracket optimizer. Build a winning March Madness bracket in seconds with the Betting Pros Bracket Optimizer. Optimize your bracket using trusted sources like KenPom, BPI, and the most accurate bracket experts tracked by Betting Pros. Lock in your top picks and let us optimize the rest of your bracket based on advanced stats, history, odds, and more. You can quickly view key matchup info as you fill out your bracket, getting optimal upsets and sleeper picks based on the size of your bracket pool. To access the bracket optimizer, visit bettingpros.com/bracket or download the Betting Pros app at bettingpros.com/apps. Guys, let's jump into our best bets here. We got a couple of different types of bets that I asked you guys to prepare. We will start with just your favorite first round bet overall. Whatever matchup you want to pick, your favorite one. Jason, I'll start with you here. What's your favorite first round bet?
I've got Morehouse State, and last I checked, this line was at 12 in a lot of places. It opened even higher. It started moving down last night. And I think there's a couple of reasons why this line is attractive. A lot to do with Illinois and what they profile as. We've seen teams like Illinois struggle relative to the spread in the first round. And by that, I mean a team who's offensively skewed. They're really good on offense. Their defensive numbers aren't that great. They don't turn people over. In fact, they're like 360th in turnover rate on defense. So they don't get out and pressure teams and turn people over. And we've seen Ohio State have that profile when they lost to Oral Roberts. They look if you look at the stats, they look identical to Ohio State from that year. Iowa, the year with Luka Garza, but couldn't defend. We've seen that out of a lot of Big Tens have this profile where they just don't turn people over and they're better on offense than defense. And they have success in the Big Ten tournament, and then they go in the NCAA tournament and face a different style of team. Moorhead plays slow. Their issue is they have tended to turn the ball over, but that's not something Illinois exploits. So I think what you have is a case where against opponent who can control tempo as an underdog and a team who may struggle to get stops because their defensive profile suggests they're not going to force turnovers and they're not great on defense. I like getting the points here for Moorhead to stay close in a kind of controlled pace game.
PJ, you and I have texted a lot over the years about my negative view of Brad Underwood. What do you make of this bet, Morehead State plus 12 against the Illini?
I think it's a great bet. I love Moorhead as well. I'd sprinkle some money line. I think Illinois is on upset alert. I think a great stat is the winner of the Big Ten conference tournament has not made it out of the first weekend since 2019. These teams struggle. I mean, we saw it with Purdue, obviously, last year. We've seen it with Michigan State and that loss to Middle Tennessee. These Big Ten teams, they win the tournament. Iowa and Keegan Murray, they get a lot of hype around them because it's that last game that we all see, the whole country is watching before that Selection Sunday reveal. And we know the Big Ten has obviously struggled here in the last 5 or 6 years. Jason brings up some great points about Moorhead State. These teams in the tournament, like Illinois, that have great offenses and want to go, 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 when they play against these teams like Moorhead that want to slow you down, the later that those games are close, it really favors the underdog. So like Moorhead a lot with the points, and I'd take a stab with the money line as well. I certainly think they're alive in that game.
PJ, I'll stick with you. What's your favorite first round bet?
Yeah, I'm going to stay in that East region. I like Northwestern plus a 2.5 against Florida Atlantic. These 8-9 games, a lot of the times, I think people gravitate to the name that they kind of see. And everybody's going to see Florida Atlantic, and they're going to see them as that team that made it to the Final Four last year, return all of their key players except for one guy. But I like this matchup for Northwestern. FAU is nowhere near the defensive team this year than they were last year. They were a top 40, 35 defense last year, really good on that side of the ball. They're 116th this year in adjusted defense. So they can't guard anybody, and going up against a team that plays as slow as a pace of Northwestern, that could be one of those games where FAU isn't hitting their shots. They just lost to a Temple team that they were favored by 14.5 against. So I think this is a great matchup for Northwest. They got veteran guards. Boo Booey's really good. And Chris Collins is a solid coach. This game to me should be more of a pick 'em, but because of FAU being a team that just made it to the Final Four, I think that's why you're getting the bump with the 2.5. I think the value's with Northwestern, so I like them plus the points.
What do you make of that one, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, this Northwestern team, until the loss in the Big Ten tournament, had largely maybe looked just as good with some of the injuries they've had. I mean, they've survived their center being out. This team's this team's well coached and plays hard. FAU, I have concern. They had nearly everybody back, and
Right.
the chemistry hasn't been there. When I studied their lineup, they were best when Boyd was out. When they actually had some people out of the mix, so you wonder if there's just too many mouths to feed, and the chemistry isn't as great this year in year two. And I thought that the Dusty, I thought he was going to Weatherspoon more and not playing Boyd less down the stretch, and then he went back to him in the tournament. And so I don't know because Boyd's a high usage player. They already have two good guards. I wonder if there's just too many guards that want the ball in their hands that it kind of just the whole is not as good as the parts were last year.
So we like Northwestern in the first round and Morehead State, at least against the spread there. Let's go to our favorite double-digit seed to make the Sweet 16. And PJ, I'll let you be the one to share your pick, but I have to say, you had a lot of people going along with you here in the chat last night during our live stream who were very in on this pick.
So, guys, a lot of times what I like to do when we get to the NCAA tournament, one of my favorite trends is over the last 20 years, teams that are top 10 in offense, according to Ken Palm, and 100 or worse in defense have not made it to the Sweet 16 in the last 20 years. We have two teams that fit that this year in Kentucky and Alabama. So I immediately go and I look at who's going to be the double-digit seed that's kind of playing with those two teams. And I'm looking at that Kentucky, right, little mini regional, and them potentially getting the winner of Texas Tech or NC State. And I like riding the hot hand of this NC State team, obviously winning 5 games in 5 days. I don't really think Texas Tech is that strong of a 6 seed. Grant McCaslin's done a great job in year one. They certainly were benefactors of just playing in a really deep Big 12 league and getting some good wins on their resume. But I think that's a good matchup for NC State. And then just going with that trend, right? If they get Kentucky, You gotta like NC State in that game. So it's not so much about the Wolfpack being necessarily the double digit seed I like the best. It's just I like their path a lot, and I think you're going to get good value. So I'm on the Wolfpack if you're looking for a double digit seed to make the Sweet 16.
Yeah, and NC State's so interesting because I mean, I was looking at their their most recent schedule. Obviously, you win 5 games in 5 days, ACC tournament. Everybody very excited about that and seeing what happened there. But like they lost their last 4 games before the conference tournament. I think 7 of their last 9. So it's not like they were like figuring out as the season got on and getting better. They just got hot at the right time, which sometimes it all is all it takes. And it's a fun Cinderella run, already before the tournament's even tipped off. Jason, I know you have a different pick, but what do you make of the NC State pick?
Yeah, so I'll say a couple things there. Regardless of the end, they did have DJ Horn miss part of their season finale, and when Horn's completely healthy, and when Diarra is in the starting lineup, which happened, they made that switch. They have been about 2 or 3 points better than their season long performance. So this is a team when you look at their run, and it kind of started early, even if the wins didn't. I think this is a team where there is a legitimate change due to the lineup they're running now, if they're fully healthy. Um, Tech, I think, has played decently recently with a smaller lineup with their center out, their 7-footer Warren Washington. But how will that work against Horn's kind of bully ball? That concerns me for Tech. If I don't know Washington's status as we talk, I'm not sure. He hadn't played in like 3 or 4 weeks. Um, you often get value. We've seen it recently with ACC teams, with Pac-12 teams. The teams that are not playing, that are from a conference that didn't get 8 bids, that didn't get 7, 8 bids, and greatness by association. I think you referenced that. They got lots of opportunities. Well, that's not NC State's case. That's not the case with like the Pac-12 teams like Oregon. And so sometimes maybe their power ratings based on things that happened in November when maybe their conference was young and inexperienced and didn't put up the results. So power ratings are kind of like gray areas, but if you can identify where there's weaknesses, like they're overvaluing, undervaluing a conference in general, and so we're just high on that team. That could be the case because I think we've seen a lot of these 11 seeds, 10 seeds come from conferences that weren't like the first and second rated conference. Because my philosophy on that is, if you were eighth in those conferences, we know you're not actually that great. We're not sure about the teams that make the run out of the conferences that don't have the hype.
Who's your Jason double
Yeah.
digit seed to make the
So
Sweet 16?
my double digit seed, I put down. I had a couple I could go to, but I'm going to go Colorado. I could go west. I could go south to New Mexico from there, but I'm going to go Colorado. I think that's one to watch. Obviously, I don't know as I say this whether they're going to be even playing in the first round because they're in the play-in game against Boise. But I think they profile as a team that to watch if they win that game, and I think they're favored. And it's one of those situations, where they could make a run out of that if they aren't, they're better than their seed. Same situation as NC State. The Pac-12, they didn't have opportunities for these quote quad one wins. They lost twice to Arizona. They got seeded down relative to, I think, their true quality based on their quote resume. But I think Colorado is a much better than a 10 seed in a play-in game type team. They're virtually unpicked in bracket pools, so that if you want to play it that way instead, they're one of those long shot picks. But I like Colorado to get hot here. I think they ran against a buzzsaw against Oregon after getting in the tournament. I think they did enough to get in, and then Oregon blitzed them. But I think this Colorado team is legit.
I should have looked this up ahead of time. PJ, do you know what's the stat that like, a team that wins in the first 4, like, is it that they always win at least their one first game, or there's one that there's some stat about that, right?
Most
It
years,
was like
one
the
at least
first
one.
game. It's also like
Yeah.
they make the Sweet 16 as well, and obviously VCU and UCLA made the Final Four
Yeah.
out of the first 4 as well. So I think Colorado's is a great pick. I'm glad that the committee put them in, even though they lost to Oregon in the Pac-12 championship. Team with really good guards, athletic bigs. Of the teams in the first 4 that I think could be the most dangerous, certainly I think Colorado of all the teams is by far the choice. And I think that's going to be a hell of a matchup for Marquette, whoever they get, whether it's Florida or Colorado, like Jason and I both think. It's going to be a really tough game for them. And I think the winner of that Florida Colorado game has a chance in the bottom side of that bracket to make potentially an Elite Eight run.
Jason, let's stick with you for the next category, which is favorite long shot bet to make the Final Four, because you threw out a couple of different options here, and you can run through all of them if you'd like. But one of them was, as the longest shot option, Colorado.
Yeah, Colorado obviously a long shot plus 3,500, not popular, and we don't know if they're going to be playing. So you've got to get through not three, you got to get 5 wins, all right, instead of 4. So they're on the list. Other long shot would be A&M, and I say that for this reason. Not knowing if they can beat Nebraska, but that's why they're a long shot, right? They're in an 8-9 game. Houston is injury impacted, maybe. So Juwan Roberts is a question mark. That creates, you don't like variance when you're the favorite. Like the fact that we don't know what percentile he'll be at by Sunday is a question mark that I think provides value. This A&M team made a legitimate lineup change, like a philosophical shift, right? Went to a 3-guard lineup, and Obaseki has changed that team. This team was struggling to score 60 for most of SEC play. They were in rock fights. And by going to a 3rd guard who can shoot along with their 2 star guards, they've unlocked it. I mean, they scored over 90 against Kentucky. They were beating, Florida for most of the game, had a huge lead. Then they got in foul trouble. Florida came back. Obaseki fouled out. Florida ran past them at the end. But this A&M team is a completely different team than the one we've seen on the court most of the year. And I'm willing in tournament settings to buy short-term changes if there's a reason for it. And there is a legitimate lineup reason for why they've changed.
PJ, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of good points. I didn't do anything with that team or really that region either. I kind of just stayed away a little bit from Houston and kind of that top half of the bracket. Brings up good points. I mean, Roberts is a key part of that team. Houston too, a big part of their offense is the offensive glass, right? They really aren't a great shooting team, and they rely a lot on their second and third chance opportunities. So Houston, I personally think that they could go far in this tournament just because I think there are so many great teams on the other side of the bracket that it does set up well for them. But I have my questions with Houston. It feels like the same team to me this year than it has in years past, right? On a sheet of paper, the metrics, they all love them. But it feels like, they go up against these offensive juggernaut type teams. Can Houston win a game in the 80s? Can they win a game in the 90s? Can they win that game that UConn did against St. John's the other night, 95-90? I don't know if they can. So that's my issue with Houston, and certainly this Roberts injury is a big concern as well.
PJ, I'll stick with you. Who's your long shot bet for the Final Four?
Final Four, I went with Oregon, 50-1 to make the Final Four out of the Midwest. We talk about all these great tournament coaches. We were talking about a little bit earlier, right? I mean, Tom Izzo is certainly one of the ones that comes to mind. We don't give Dana Altman enough love, and Oregon hasn't been in the tournament the last couple of years. Guys, he's never lost in the first round of the NCAA tournament. He is 15-6 against the spread in the NCAA tournament, the best record of any active coach. And there are certain coaches and certain programs that are built for the regular season, and there are certain coaches who build their teams for March, right? That was Boeheim's thing for so long with the zone. He knew regular season fine. When we get into the tournament and teams have to prepare for that zone that don't see it at any point, that's going to be a big advantage for us. The way that he builds his teams with these athletic bigs, now that N'Faly Dante is healthy, one of the best big men in the country, Kuznard's a really good guard that doesn't get talked about enough. Oregon's been a team that's been dealing with injuries all year. They're finally healthy, and I think this bottom side of the region, Creighton is a team that I think a lot of people are going to like, Tennessee as well. I think it could be a good path for Oregon, and you know what, guys? It's the final year of the Pac-12, right? So let's get crazy. Let's have some fun. Maybe one of these teams make a deep run for the conference. I think Oregon could be that team.
Yeah, he better get it done now before he becomes a member of the Big Ten, and then his ability to win the tournament.
That's true. That's a great point.
Yeah, like Altman, great point about how many there's I don't know if there's many coaches in the country who've had what he's had, which is he has made adjustments late in the year on several occasions on teams that were struggling and got them to get on surges, win the Pac-12. They did it in 19. They went in as a 12 seed and were dominant down the stretch and won the Pac-12, and then went to the Sweet 16, beat Wisconsin. They did it in 21, got in as a 7 seed and rolled Iowa. And they went as a 12, I think, earlier, like a decade ago, where they went on a run in all different ways. And this one is different too. He's had to adapt to a team that basically got destroyed by injuries. And it took them a while to figure it out. But now they basically like, we're relying on our 2 stars and our freshman shooter. And that's it. And everybody else is a role player. And they've increased their usage. Dante is dominating. And if that continues, like if that can, I mean, go look at the box scores from like the last 5 games for N'Faly Dante. It is ridiculous what this guy has done down the stretch. Like, good for him. 5th-year senior, has battled injuries, but man, can they ride that? They don't have much depth. Can they ride that? It's for 4 games. I don't know, but there's reasons to believe, again, they found something.
It sounds like we're barreling towards an all Pac-12 right side of the Final Four. Colorado, Oregon. We signing up for that.
Oh, yeah,
Having a
for
little
sure.
fun.
Yeah.
Bill Walton on the call? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
Please
I
don't
wish.
do that. Yeah.
I wish. Dive into March Madness with the 2024 NCAA Tournament Picks Challenge. Join our contest in the Betting Pros app for a shot at a lifetime premium subscription. Track your bets, compete in our exclusive leaderboard, and win big prizes ranging from lifetime to yearly subscriptions for the top 5 in ROI. Just submit a minimum of 10 college basketball bets during the tournament to enter. That's a minimum of 10. Get started at bettingpros.com/NCAA or on the Betting Pros app and let the games begin. Again, a lifetime premium subscription. That sounds pretty good. Let's go to our favorite long shot bet to win it all and not just to make the Final Four. PJ, I'll start with you here.
Yeah, this was a tough question. I mean, certain years, right? UConn was certainly a team that you could have gotten great odds before the tournament started last year to make a deep run. Bama and Houston and Purdue were towards the top of the favorites there. I think this year, if I'm looking at a long shot, I'm going to be honest with you guys. There really aren't many teams that I would like. I would say, really, when you look at all the criterias this year, there are really only 6 or 7 teams that can win the national championship. And the one team that kind of fits every category that I think could potentially be worth a sprinkle is Marquette at 25-1. I know Jason and I were just talking about Colorado and Florida potentially being a really tough second round game for them. Much like Houston, though, with Roberts, what's going on with Kolek and Marquette, right? And this was a team that had a lot of expectations going into the tournament last year. Kolek was not good. He had a hand injury going into that game. They went home. We know guards win in March, and you're not going to find many better backcourts than Kolek and Cam Jones for Marquette. They certainly could be a difficult matchups for teams with Iguodala being so athletic, and they kind of play 5 out at times on offense. I like the makeup of their team. Shaka's been another one of those coaches that outside of that run with VCU, he's really struggled in the tournament. But we talk about all these top seeds, right? All these 1s and 2s. It feels like the team that absolutely no one is talking about is Marquette as a 2 seed. And if Kolek is healthy, I mean, they've played UConn 3 times this year. Like, they're not going to face any team in this tournament better than that team. And they've played them 3 times. They played Purdue. They played Tennessee. They're more than battle tested. Kolek is the big concern, but I feel like part of that price is because of the uncertainty around him. So if you're looking for a long shot, I think Marquette would probably be my pick at 25-1.
What do you make of Marquette, Jason?
I mean, I like it. I know I mentioned Colorado, same region, but we can understand that there's, with these long shots, what you're looking for are for high variance factors, right? You're looking for, you're not looking for the median outcome. You're like, what's the best case? Does this team have the ability? And the Kolek thing creates uncertainty both ways. I think it creates value though for them to make a run if they can survive early. I've been impressed with what they did without him, honestly, for the most part, until they ran into UConn, who's just a buzzsaw, and if they're not at 100%, they aren't beating UConn. But this is a good team. This isn't just a Kolek team. This is a legit, really good team. They're super undervalued in brackets. I know we didn't have the data last night. I'll tell you, they're being picked at about half their chances of winning in the market. They're only at like 2% pick. So if you want to play them in a bracket rather than buy an NCAA future, you can probably get better odds, better pot odds. Just put a Marquette winner in a bracket and trust that no one else will have them in your 200-person pool. So, I mean, I think there's some interesting things about Marquette. I think they have the balance. They are better than their raw numbers because not only has Kolek been out, Stevie Mitchell was out. They've had, if you exclude the games where they weren't at 100%, they're even better. They're probably a top 5 team. And when I say that, there's like a bunch of teams that are close, but they're basically in that tier, right behind the top seeds, very close to them, where they can certainly win on a neutral court against them. And you could see this team winning a title. It's not out of the question.
Jason, who's your long shot bet?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to say that I will not take Arizona. I'll go even longer than Arizona. I did have them down as, that team again. Tommy Lloyd's lost twice early, and I do think that they could do it. But again, they do scare me. It's another high variance situation with Arizona. I'm going to go Duke, and I know it's maybe a little crazy. You're going to hear the people say no team has won a title who didn't play in their semi. You've heard all these talking points. We ran the data. I mean, most top contenders don't lose in the quarterfinals, so it's a small sample size. But when I actually looked at our expected wins, they perform about like other teams. The deal is most of them aren't good enough. And so I think this Duke team is balanced. I am concerned about how they finish, but that's accounted for in the ratings. They would have been a shorter price 2 weeks ago. If they had finished strong and been on the 3 seed line, they would be a shorter price. And so I'm willing to trust that they're not deep, but they are a balanced roster with size. And if they get the right combination of outcomes, if some of the other high seeds on their side of the bracket are impacted, let's say by injuries or they don't advance, this Duke team is balanced enough to, I think, exploit that and make a deep run.
We are really diving deep into the South region. We've hit on Houston, we've now Duke, NC State. We've talked about Kentucky overvalued, a little Florida, Colorado, Marquette. We're really giving the South region its due for sure. Let's go to the worst value bet to win it all. And Jason, I'll start with you because we've already talked a little bit about your pick.
Yeah, I had Houston down, and that's kind of, we talked about them on kind of the A&M future, but Houston at plus 500. I mean, they power rate in the top. If you look at just like Ken Palmer, just raw power ratings, they're going to be right there with UConn. They're going to be right there with the other teams. You got the Roberts injury, and not only the Roberts injury, it's that they've lost Tugler, and they aren't deep at the position he plays now. And so he's a very important player on a team that doesn't have a lot of size if he's out. And he's like their junkyard dog that really helps drive that team from the inside. And so there are concerns there. There are concerns. We've seen this team have shooting issues. When you look at their offensive numbers, the one deficiency is they have some bad shooting games. They need to get on the glass and all that stuff. How will that play against teams that can, are elite? They haven't. I think their numbers are a little inflated. They blew out some cupcakes. They certainly were good enough to win the Big 12, but I'm not sure that number is reflective of where they are now. And we just saw them struggle against Iowa State with Roberts hurt and with a game where they struggled against a really good defense. I have concerns about Houston. I think from a value perspective, I think there is a gap between them and UConn right now with the injury concerns, and they're close in price. And there's a big gap between Houston and everybody else, and I think some of those other teams can get closer to them.
PJ, I'm not going to ask you about Houston because you kind of already hit on them already. Who is your worst value bet?
Yeah, it's Purdue at plus 650. And the reason for me is just the fact that I think UConn is kind of in a tier of its own, which Jason and we've kind of alluded to, right, in this podcast. And even though maybe the metrics say that Purdue and Houston should be on that level, it's like UConn, they're the team that we trust. We've seen them do it. Houston and Purdue, we haven't seen them do it yet. So if there was better value on Purdue, then maybe you could get involved, right? If you were getting like a 10-1, 11-1, if they were in the Arizona, North Carolina range, you could potentially talk yourself into that bet. But for a team that that has never been to the Final Four, never won a national championship, obviously they're going to draw the parallels to Virginia. I think people forget like how much had to go right for Virginia to win that national championship, right? They played Purdue. You had that free throw that was tipped all the way out. Diabate beats the buzzer. They had the game against Auburn in the Final Four where Kyle Guy was fouled on a three. Hunter hit a three-pointer with 20 seconds left in the championship game. It was one of those team of destiny runs, right? And it's like if you're banking on that for a plus 650, that's just something I really don't want to get involved with. Now, if Purdue wins the whole thing, nobody would be shocked. They have the best player in the sport. They have the talent to do so. They're a number one seed. And, metrics wise, they fit everything you're looking for of a champion. I just can't back a team that's never been in that spot at that price. And, again, a coach that has not had success and been to the mountaintop before.
I think you mentioned that Elite Eight game, Virginia,
Oh,
Purdue, the year Virginia.
it's brought back.
I think that Carson Edwards performance is the best individual performance I've ever seen watching college basketball. He was pulling up from Steph Curry range and just hitting everything, and they still couldn't beat the team of destiny, Virginia.
Right.
That was a wild performance to watch. I will never forget that game. Jason, we hit on Purdue a little bit last night, but for the betting audience, what do you make of them? We talked about how they've lost to what, like a 12 seed, a 13
Yeah.
seed, a 14 seed, and a 16 seed now in the last several years. It's been a tough, stretch of marches for them.
First of all, you triggered PTSD into me. I had a bracket in a big money pool that if Virginia would have lost that game in the Elite Eight, I would have clinched it outright before the Final Four. And I was basically the person that beat me had to hit the inside straight with every result that happened. And it started with that play.
Man.
And I ended up not winning the pool. And so I have just had some bad flashbacks to that run by Virginia. Here's what I would say. I don't rule teams out because Purdue's lost in the past because they lost 16 seed. I ask why though. They have been better at some things, but I still have concerns. They are 4-4 in games where they turn the ball over 20% or more this year. They're undefeated when they do not. If you can turn Purdue over, you got a chance to beat them. If you can get to their guards, if you can pressure them. And the thing is, I think there are good teams that will be in the Final Four that can do that. So I think that I don't see them losing like they did last year. I think they'll win early. The question is, will they, when they go up against the cream of the crop that can do the things that they've struggled with in the past, will those teams be able to beat them? I would tend to probably play against Purdue if I knew the matchups. I don't know the matchups yet, but I think there's some out there that could be tough matchups for them late.
PJ, give me your favorite bet to win it all.
Gonna go with North Carolina at 13-1, guys. I think that's the best bet on the board. I know a lot of people are gonna be a little weary of that loss to NC State. I mean, we're just talking about the team of destiny with Virginia. I just think that was NC State's night, right? They played out of their mind. Horn was great. Burns was great. I didn't think North Carolina necessarily played all that bad. I thought it was interesting that a team playing their fifth game in 5 days, Hubert Davis didn't decide to press full court the whole game. You saw towards the end there, NC State was making some turnovers, and that potentially could have made things different. This North Carolina team, when they want to defend at a high level, they are really good. There was a stretch there in December and January where just defensively they were lights out. And they have the ACC Player of the Year in RJ Davis. We know that March is about guard play. They have one of the best going into this tournament. They just check a lot of boxes, right? In this era of one and dones and freshman phenoms, North Carolina is not built that way. They have so many upperclassmen. And I think Baycott and Davis, everybody's talking about Purdue losing to a 16 seed last year. How about North Carolina being the preseason number one team? You're up 15 points at halftime in the national championship game. You don't even make it back to the tournament, right? One of your best players, Caleb Love, leaves. He decides to bail after that season. We're all trying to talk about this Purdue narrative. I think we're forgetting about this North Carolina team that they have some demons to exercise in this year's tournament as well. We already talked about the path for them and how well it sets up for them potentially, especially later on in their region. Obviously, getting that winner in the East Regional, whoever it ends up being, UConn, Auburn, Iowa State, whoever they end up playing, that's going to be a tough game. But at 13-1, where some of these other teams are valued, I like the Heels, guys. I think that's the bet.
Jason, before we get to your pick for your favorite bet to win it all, what are your thoughts on the Tar Heels?
I'm not as high on North Carolina, but I will say this. About North Carolina. I do think have a potential tough round two matchup that's a barrier more than most one seeds would face, and not just Michigan State, by the way, because Michigan State could bomb out. Mississippi State, they've got two quality ones, so they're not relying on, oh, if Michigan State doesn't win, it opens up a lot. This Mississippi State team just played. I mean, they've been much better with Tolu Smith when they're full lineup. They are a legit team that's probably better than an 8 as well on quality. So this is a tough draw. But once I get past that, I think it opens up. Here's what I would say: North Carolina is really popular in bracket pools. They're actually like even with Houston and Purdue. But in the betting markets, the opposite. So if you actually like North Carolina, the better way to play them is in the betting markets where you're getting a 2-to-1 price relative to Purdue and Houston rather than in a bracket where the bracket's even on those teams. So you're actually getting more value on like money line plays on Carolina than you are in bracket plays.
All right, Jason. Now I know your pick is somewhat dependent on whatever the number is you can get, but you are picking
Yeah,
UConn, and I'm
I'm
kind of
boring. I'm
glad
boring.
this is the last team we're talking about here
Yeah.
because I want. Is this a UConn versus the field situation? I mean, they're not quite on the level of
No.
dominance of like a 2015 Kentucky, but they are the clear favorites. It seems like, and everybody that I've talked to, at least since the bracket has come out, and really in the last couple of weeks, it feels like you're trying to make the case against UConn, for anybody else rather than just, oh, look at their path. Can they make it? Whatever. So UConn versus the field, maybe that's a bit too strong way to phrase it, but
Yeah.
this is the clear favorite.
Yeah, I mean, it's the NCAA tournament. Anything can happen. We've seen teams better than this UConn team lose at various points throughout the history of it. I mean, we can go back as much as you want. Some Kansas teams in the late '90s, some Duke teams. So yes, anything's possible. I would put their true number in the 22 to 25% range, but that's based on they're probably 2 to 3 points better than their raw power rating, and I think they're 2 to 3 points better on a neutral court if they play any team in this field. And so they're going to be the favorite, and they're going to be heavy favorites against a lot of teams. And so, if the path doesn't open up, like last year, the path opened up and they were dominant in the tournament. The path opened up greatly for them, but I think they still would have won it. So I think what you're looking at is it's certainly, I would take the field if you gave me that. But if you get this number at about, plus better than plus 400, which like I wouldn't go like to 300 to get you 25% implied. So I probably wouldn't go down to there. But if I'm getting a 400 plus 400 where I've got a 20% chance they win it, I'm probably looking at UConn because I do think they're better than Houston and Purdue relative to the value. I think they are the better team. And so some people looking like KenPom may not agree with that, but I think they are the better team because they have been best when they have their full lineup. They have been more injury impacted than those teams, and they're still as good as they are, which tells you they should be better now entering March.
Yeah, PJ, you alluded earlier to the fact that we had kind of been alluding to UConn as sort of the elephant in the room really throughout this conversation. How short would the odds need to be for you to not want to bet them?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I can tell you guys right now, I think Auburn might pick them off in the Sweet 16. I think that's the game. That's the game right there. If UConn, if they survive that, I think they're going to be a national champion. We saw it last year with Bama and Houston, though, the two betting favorites. What round did they lose in? The Sweet 16, right? I mean, a lot of the times that's kind of the round that gets you. I think it's so fascinating, guys. Like I talked about at the start of the podcast, there are so many teams in this region I think would be very trendy picks if they weren't in UConn's region. But because they are, we're just all kind of throwing them away. Guys, I was watching ESPN last night. There were 8 or 9 analysts on that show, and every single one of them picked UConn. And I'm just like, I mean, again, they're the clear-cut team. Like, you understand why, but it just feels like if there's any sporting event where everybody's on the same thing, you kind of want to go the other way. I understand why a lot of people like them. I understand why you would even still bet them at that short of a price. But for me, I think the play is Auburn because when they match up in the Sweet 16, potentially, UConn's only going to be like a 4.5, 5.5 point favorite in that game. And I think it's going to surprise a lot of people. But Auburn's good. There's only one team, according to KenPom, it's top 10 in offense and defense, and it's not UConn. Now, they are 11th in defense, so they're right there. But Auburn's 10 in offense and 4th in defense. They are good, really, really good. They had a strong showing in the SEC tournament. So I think there's a chance that UConn could potentially lose to Auburn. That's kind of the way I'm trending.
Do you, PJ, think about like, do you think that fans and people who are betting or filling out their brackets, they don't just think about the fact, and I know it's a different roster, they don't just think about the fact that UConn won it all last year. They were so dominant on that run. They made mincemeat out of every single opponent that they faced on that run. It was ridiculous how little in question every one of those games was. So not just the fact that they are the defending champs and are the number one overall seed here, but the fact that they were so dominant last year. Does that weigh in your mind at all, or do you think that's weighing in other people's minds?
I don't, they were so dominant to your point. They were 6-0 against the spread. They won every game by double digits. I think the reason that I would like UConn the most is because that team last year was so great in the non-conference, and this team was so great in the non-conference again this year, right? Everybody's looking at how they finished the season. Everybody's looking at what they're doing the last 10 games, but what they did in the non-conference last year and what they've done this year, I mean, they are a machine when they get out of Big East play. So I certainly think that, that was the big discussion coming in when you're in late January, early February, people are like, UConn's great, but it's so hard to repeat. And it's kind of like we're just all throwing that away because of how impressive they have looked and how kind of everybody else around them has fallen a little bit.
Jason, any other favorite bets here before we get out of there?
I had a couple, like I like to play the round twos to miss the two-way markets. So, you know, PJ is not going to like that. I want to go against Carolina to make because that way I don't have to pick Michigan State or Mississippi State. I think I'm getting a decent price. I also want to pick against Houston because again, I like A&M, but I'll tell you what, Nebraska is a team I power rate higher than their raw numbers. When I look at them, they've had some injuries. When they have the current lineup in, that this is a legit team too. And so I think either of them, if Houston's not at 100%, this is going to be a game where the spread kind of shocks people because I think it'll be well under 10 with Houston. We're used to seeing a lot of 10-point spreads recently. They rolled Kansas, what they did in the Big 12. I think this number is going to be shorter, but we'll see.
PJ, what about you? Any other bets that maybe I didn't fit any of the categories I sent you, but that you would just want to shout out?
BYU is a team that I would watch out for in that East Regional. We talked about Morehead State against Illinois. I think that they're gonna handle Duquesne. I think they're gonna beat the winner of Illinois and Morehead State in the Sweet 16. If they draw Iowa State, they have played them twice. They should have won both games. They won the game in Provo, the game in Ames. They played a couple weeks ago. BYU did not score a point in the final 4 minutes, and they only lost by a possession. So Iowa State is really good defensively. They obviously just won the Big 12. A lot of people are going to kind of have that fresh in their minds. BYU is one of these teams that we've kind of seen in this new era of college basketball that lives and dies by the threes. If that's a game where they're hitting their threes because Iowa State will give up threes, that's a really bad matchup for them. So all these great teams, we've talked UConn, Auburn, right? Iowa State. BYU, they're going to have a really good Elite Eight price because of the teams in their region. I think there's a chance they could make the Elite Eight.
PJ, I didn't ask you to prep this, but we can't have a podcast episode about March Madness without you giving me your Final Four. Who's your Final Four?
I have Auburn, UNC. I'm going to go with Florida and Tennessee. So I got three SEC teams in the Final Four this year. I'll go North Carolina against Tennessee, and I have the Tar Heels winning the whole thing.
Wow, going big on the Tar Heels. Jason, what about you? Do you have a Final Four you can give us?
Oh, well, I'll go UConn. I love the Auburn. I mean, again, I love those two teams. I would probably pick them in the championship game if they were on opposite sides of the bracket, Connecticut and Auburn. But I'll go Connecticut. I do think Auburn, relatively speaking, their worst games have come against elite offenses. They destroy. If you don't have a great offense, Auburn's going to destroy you, like they did South Carolina twice. I do think Connecticut can maybe do what they need to do against that Auburn pressure, but Auburn's tough. So I'll take UConn. I'll take, I guess, Arizona begrudgingly over UNC. I will take, I'm going to go with, PJ's long shot, even though I picked Colorado as a really long shot. I'll take Marquette in the Final Four if we're looking for value. And then, the final one, what do we want here? completely wide open. Do I want to take Purdue?
I actually feel really. I like Tennessee a lot as my representative from the Midwest.
Yeah,
So I'm
yeah.
actually
I mean,
if you take Tennessee, then you actually have the same Final
yeah.
Four as me,
So,
which is
man,
UConn. Yeah,
10 days ago, I would have said Tennessee. I'll play against the people that think Barnes can't win, and then they do what they did. And the Kentucky one doesn't concern me. Kentucky shot lights out. It happens. The fact that Mississippi State bullied and Dalton had his worst game since Maui was concerning against that competition, but I still think Tennessee's capable. I guess I'll go with Tennessee. They do have the defensive numbers. They are a different offense. Up until that stretch, I would have said this team's peaking. They're getting their point guard was coming off a torn ACL. They were working them back in the lineup. This team is peaking at the right time. They're getting healthy. They're getting better throughout the year. And then the last 10 days happened. And so maybe that was a blip. We've seen that before. Hopefully that was a blip. So yeah, I think Tennessee's a good, solid value pick. If they get to the Elite Eight, I like him against Purdue.
yeah, I definitely do as well. We will get out of there on that. Thank you to Jason Lisk from Pool Genius for joining us. Thank you, of course, to PJ Glasser from BetQL for joining us. Guys, fun bracket talk. I mean, not PJ mentioned, Thursday, Friday, 2 best days in the calendar. These next 2 or 3 days are also super fun, just getting excited and the anticipation and toying with your bracket and all your different pools. It's just what a fun week for college hoops fans, and I'm really excited. So for the guys who came on, thank you to both of them. Thank you everybody for sticking around for an hour of bracket talk. I'm Ryan Wormeli, and we'll see you again next time.